Okay, here's a little video about how to mobilize 100% of the people in your church for evangelism. But before we get into that, let me just explain a little bit about Evangelism Strategies International, or ESI for short. There's a banner which we use on one of our websites. To engage in evangelism is to engage in frontline spiritual warfare, hence the pieces of armor, Ephesians 6:12. To win the war, we must think, plan, pray, and act strategically, biblically, and intelligently, hence the chess pieces. There's Matthew 10:16. So that's a little bit about the banner. This ministry merges these two great biblical themes. By evangelism, just by way of explanation, for example, I mean doing something as simple as giving away a small business card to someone which would direct them to a website where they could hear the gospel on a video. And there's a little card that we use, things like that. So what I don't mean is standing on a street corner with a megaphone looking weird. So we need to understand what we mean by evangelism to start with. Okay, and what about the byline, making disciples, growing the church? Well, most Christians have never been discipled in evangelism, believe it or not, which is why research shows the church in the West is in decline. And what's the main cause of this decline? Well, I put it down to colleges, Bible colleges and seminaries. The tragedy is that research shows only 10% of seminaries and Bible colleges around the world now have a course on evangelism. And given that the evangelization of the world is the mission of the church, that is an absolute tragedy. So what happens is students graduate from these colleges and seminaries, they become pastors and leaders, and because they don't have any heart for evangelism, they pass that attitude on and those beliefs on to the people in their churches, and that's the reason the church is in decline. And of course, you've got people who are denominational heads of Christian organizations who espouse evangelism, the theory of it, but they don't actually do it. So that creates in the people underneath them an understanding that evangelism can just be a theory. You don't actually have to do it. And so the tragedy is right at the top of the tree. So here's a little bit of church history. Further research shows that 100% of the early church were mobilized for evangelism, and it experienced explosive growth. We know, we can read about that in Acts. We learn from this that there is a direct correlation between evangelism and church growth. Today, only 2% of Christians actually engage in evangelism. So we've gone 98% in the wrong direction. Wow, that's pretty powerful. Here's some more understanding about evangelism. If your church or denomination has stopped growing, it's because the people in your church have stopped evangelizing. See, evangelism precedes genuine church growth. So we can have a right and wrong focus about this. Most churches in the West ask, how do we get more people to come to our church? I believe it's the wrong focus. In contrast, the early church asked, how can we evangelize the world? This is the biblical focus. It's the right focus. So what's the lesson from history? If we focus on Jesus and his commands to evangelize the world and making disciples who have a passion for the same, the church will experience explosive growth again. But if we don't, it won't. So I've said enough's enough. If we continue to focus on getting people to come to our church and not on evangelism, the overall number of Christians in the West will continue to decline. You see, the decline in part can be attributed to churches turning away from evangelism in order to grow, to a reliance on marketing in order to grow. You see, the truth is some churches in the West have grown phenomenally through marketing without doing any evangelism. So as a ministry, we want to address this issue. Marketing precedes transfer growth. Evangelism precedes genuine growth. Non-involvement in evangelism precedes negative growth, which is the case of the church in the West at the moment. The decline of church numbers in the West can also, in part, be attributed to churches turning away from evangelism towards social action in order to grow. Now, don't get me wrong, we completely endorse social action and the need for it, but not at the expense of evangelism. That's the key point. As a ministry, we want to address this issue as well. You see, dislocating social action from evangelism opens the door for further church decline. How does it do this? Well, we can unwittingly give potential converts the impression that a Christian is just someone who does good works. As such, they reason, well, I do good works, so I must already be a Christian. Why go to church? Why tithe and sing songs and have to give up your Sunday mornings and read the Bible and all that sort of stuff if that's what it means to be a Christian? I can do that. I can be a Christian without going to church. Just do good works. Existing Christians can get the same idea and drop out of going to church, eventually dropping out of the faith completely. So the challenge for us is to keep the biblical balance. If we are all social action, showing the love of Christ through practical deeds, and no evangelism, that is sharing the gospel and the need for salvation, we are acting unbiblically. We are all walk and no talk. But if we are all evangelism and no social action, we are acting equally unbiblically. We're all talk and no walk. So it's not social action or evangelism, it's both. Another factor contributing to a decline of the church in the West is our preoccupation with evangelistic events. Now, don't get me wrong, special events have a definite place in God's plan to redeem His world. Reinhard Bonnke, Billy Graham, Greg Laurie, evangelistic crusades. I wish we had an evangelistic crusade in every town, in every city, every week of the year. They're unbelievably good and they're effective. But the truth is, they are not God's A plan for His church. God's A plan is to mobilize the church, those without the gift of evangelism, for the day in, day out, 365 days of the year, proclamation of the gospel with friends, family, and total strangers. Total strangers. Why the need to go to total strangers? Well, there are at least four reasons. You've heard the research, in inverted commas, that supposedly shows most people come to faith through a friend or family member, right? Well, this research is terribly flawed and very misleading. And if you want to know why that's true, it's so, you need to read the chapter in my book about that. Second reason we should go to total strangers, the Christian church represents just a tiny proportion of the total population. If we limit our evangelism to friends and family, we will soon run out of friends and family. You only have so many friends and family, that's it. Who is going to reach the rest? The bulk of the population, people without a Christian friend or family member. Who's going to reach them? The Buddhists aren't going to do this, the Hindus aren't going to do this, the government's not going to do this. Nobody else will do this. Furthermore, research shows that most Christians don't have any non-Christian friends. Typically, those who do have non-Christian friends lose them as they get older. 3, there are many people we all brush with each day who don't have a Christian as a friend or family member. So who's going to reach them? People at petrol stations, shops, schools, public transport. Who's going to reach these guys? If we don't, if they don't have a Christian friend. Should all these people be denied Christ because they don't have a Christian friend or family member? It doesn't sound like the love of God to me. Well, you know the answer. 4, the Great Commission given by Jesus was to reach the whole world. Now, friends and family are a subset of the whole world. So to restrict our evangelism to friends and family is a blatant compromise on the Great Commission. And some people are advertising this compromise, saying only reach friends and family. Here's Mark Middleberg, who was the director of evangelism for Bill Hybels at Willow Creek. And he says this: the biggest mistake I see churches making in the area of evangelism training is to view it as a one-shot deal or even as an annual event. When that happens, everyone loses. Great comment, Mark. For these reasons, Jesus always intended evangelism to be organic to His church rather than a special event. How do we know this? Well, in Mark 16:15, He said, "Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel." The construction of the Greek translates as you go, meaning that proclaiming the gospel is meant to happen as we go about the ordinary course of each day. We've got to get this. So we've got to meet the need, letting our light shine. Where else does the Bible indicate evangelism was always intended to be this 365 day of the year experience for every believer? Well, Ephesians 4:11-14 teaches that evangelists were given to equip believers for the work of ministry. Now, for evangelists, that can only mean equipping the rest of the church, showing them how to do evangelism. It couldn't mean anything else. If all those outside of Christ need ministry, i.e. to hear the gospel, and most Christians brush with non-Christians somewhere each day, and we do, why wouldn't we daily express the love of God by meeting their need? I don't see any biblical reason not to meet their need. I can't think of one. So until evangelism is organic in every church and organically part of the life of every believer in the way I've just described, it will be impossible to complete Jesus' Great Commission. In fact, it'll become mission impossible. In fact, by relying on events, we might even be unwittingly inoculating the average Christian against personally engaging in evangelism. How so? Well, they reason, I don't need to personally do evangelism. The expert at the front of the church or at the event will do it. They've always done it, so I'll just leave it to them. We nearly always see people saved when they do it. Why change a winning formula? By relying on events, we are unwittingly conditioning Christians to think that evangelism only happens at certain times of the year or on special occasions like centenaries, etc. We unwittingly train them out of and away from 365 day of the year evangelism, which is God's A plan. They come to reason, we only do evangelism on special occasions. As such, we are undermining the New Testament ideal. Only do evangelism on special occasions, only reach friends and family, don't go to strangers, don't proclaim the gospel, win the world through social action and good works, etc. Well, what is all this? Well, I call it's stinking thinking. It's not biblical thinking, it's unbiblical thinking. Just to clarify, the Great Commission will be completed when every person on the earth has heard and understood the gospel message clearly at least once. That's what it's all about. Mission completed. Here's another issue. Scholars would affirm that any genuine gospel message must cover the following essential areas of content: why we must be saved, how Jesus can save us, what we must do to be saved, the cost of being a disciple. If we're saying we're preaching the gospel or evangelizing, we've got to cover some content. So, what's the greatest challenge to the church today? In my opinion, the greatest challenge facing the modern church is the challenge of mobilizing all believers to be faithful with day by day, 365 days of the year as you go about your day evangelism. That is it. And here's just a little word for evangelists with the gift. This is your mandate from God. Your mandate from God was to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It was to mobilize the church. So spend your time mobilizing others for evangelism. Now, you've got to do evangelism yourself, otherwise you've got no credibility. This is your job description from heaven. It was the famous evangelist D.L. Moody who said this: I don't want to do the work of 100 men, I want to get 100 men working. So we have a goal. God has given us a vision as a ministry. It is to connect with, work with, and serve church leaders who have a passion to see 100% of their people actually and personally spreading or proclaiming the gospel at least once a week. That is to be active in evangelism. We are shooting for this goal for at least 5 reasons. First of all, biblical precedent. The entire early church was mobilized for evangelism, and it grew exponentially. So we want to follow their example. 2, obedience. The Great Commission was given to all the disciples. Since we are all his disciples, the responsibility to evangelize the world belongs to all of us as well, personally. And there's all the Great Commission passages. 3, sound theology. The gospel message is a seed, the power of God for salvation. If we sow liberally, we'll reap abundantly. That's not a verse just about money, you know. If we sow sparingly, we'll reap sparingly. 4, logic. The more lines a fisherman has in the water, the more likely he is to catch fish and the more fish you'll catch. The more people in your church who engage in evangelism, the more people there will be winning people to Christ. 5, learning the lessons from history. Evangelization precedes church growth. As we understand it, the mission of the church is for the whole church to take the whole gospel to the whole world. Many churches are not growing. The reason? They are not walking in the truth of one or more of these reasons. So we don't feel we want to compromise on the goal of mobilizing everybody in every church. Who says this goal is a biblical goal? Good question. Well, John Stott says the evangelization of the world is the priority of the church. He says this: the church's mission of sacrificial service includes both evangelism and social action, so that normally the church does not have to choose between the two. But if the choice has to be made, he says, if you've got to rank them gold, silver, bronze in Olympic language, or first, second, third, if you have to do that, he says, then our first duty is to communicate the gospel. This is completely logical. Think of this. If evangelizing the world is the priority of the church, capital C, and the church is made up of the people inside the church, which it is, then to engage in evangelism theologically and biblically is the priority of every individual in the church. We have to get beyond this being a theory. Well, who else believes this? That evangelism is the priority of the church and the priority of every believer? Well, we all know and love Derek Prince. He says this: the supreme purpose of every true Christian church, supreme means number one, obviously, the chief duty of every Christian minister, the main responsibility of every Christian layman, now there's nobody left in the church other than those three categories, is to present to all who may be reached, in the clearest and most forceful way, the basic facts of the gospel of Christ, and to urge all who hear to make the definite personal response to these facts which God requires. To this, the supreme task, every other duty and activity of the church must be secondary and subsidiary. Well, that is an incredibly powerful piece of writing. I can't think of any church in the West in which evangelism is the supreme task, in which every other duty and activity of the church is secondary and subsidiary. And by the way, that means that every other duty and activity of every individual should be secondary and subsidiary to personally engaging in evangelism. Many pastors and leaders talk about the importance of evangelism, and they have it in their mission statements, and they even run seminars on it, but they don't actually do evangelism themselves. So we've got a great challenge before us here, guys. Bill Hybels said it like this: evangelism training is for every believer. We need 100% participation. Every Christian in the world, regardless of the spiritual gifts he or she may have or not have, is part of the church to which Jesus gave the Great Commission. We as leaders need to make sure that believers understand this, and then we need to do everything in our power to equip them for it. This is the only way we're going to build highly contagious churches. Good on you, Bill Hybels. So, if you are over being the pastor of a maintenance mode church or a busy but not evangelistic church, and you're tired of just transfer growth and of just discipling people who've been Christians for years, and you're frustrated that you're not seeing genuine conversions regularly in your church, then I'd like to connect with you as a ministry. We want to do that. So what's it take to mobilize 100% of the people in a church to evangelize at least once a week and sustain them in it? You know, there are a lot of people who are espousing evangelism, promoting evangelism, running seminars on evangelism, but the critical thing is the how-to. How do you do this? Well, that's the bit that's always missing, and thankfully, God has given us some strategies and some that are working that show you how to actually do it. So we're going beyond theory into practice. Well, I've said it's a lot like painting a house. Here's a house which needs painting, beautiful old home. This is what a church looks like in the spirit when only 2% of its members are active in evangelism. Here is a house whose paint job is immaculate, beautiful old home. This is what a church looks like in the spirit when 100% of its members are active in evangelism. So here's a house painter, and he's considering painting the old house. And he has some strategies. Strategy number 1, thoroughly prepare the house for painting. Paint the house. Do annual touch-ups. Now, we'd say that is a wise and responsible strategy. Strategy 2, paint the house as is. Do no preparation. Just slap the paint on the house as you see it right there in the picture. Hurriedly move on to the next house. Well, we'd call that a foolish and irresponsible strategy, carried out by a foolish and irresponsible painter. Well, here's 2 strategies for mobilizing a church. There's the beautiful church. Strategy 1, thoroughly prepare the church for evangelism. Show the people how to evangelize. Maintain the mobilization through careful planning. Now, we'd call that a wise and responsible strategy for mobilizing a church. Strategy 2, mobilize the church as is. Do no preparation. Just do some rah-rah from the front of the church to motivate and equip the flock, just whip them up, and move on to the next program or project in the life of the church. Now, we know what we call that strategy. So why is one strategy wise and responsible and the other not? Well, the wise and responsible painter recognizes there are 3 distinct phases to painting a house. Prepare the house for a repaint, apply top coats, and perform regular maintenance. Phase 1, to prepare a house for a repaint, he has to do some water blasting, he has to scrape the old paint off, he has to fill some cracks, sand, prime, and so on, do some undercoating. Phase 2, when he applies the top coats, and Phase 3, he carries out regular maintenance. A wise painter recognizes that all the hard work is done at Phase 1, preparing the house for painting. Anybody who's painted a house knows that. Likewise, the wise and responsible pastor recognizes there are 3 distinct phases to mobilizing a church for evangelism. Prepare the church for evangelism. That is, eliminate mindsets and influences which inhibit evangelism. 2, teach your people how to evangelize. And 3, maintain evangelism momentum. Phase 1, set your people free. Eliminate wrong mindsets and other influences which are causing the people in your church to not share the gospel. There's reasons why people in your church don't do this. And we found out what they are. So there's a right way and a wrong way of mobilizing a whole church. Painting a house properly involves much more than slapping paint over the top of the old paint job. We know that. Similarly, mobilizing a church for evangelism and seeing it grow through new conversions involves much more than simply inviting an evangelist in to teach your church how to do evangelism. Many churches have been burnt like that. So we've got to wake up to this. Just training people for evangelism without dealing with the root causes will only waste time, money, and valuable resources. In fact, we will inoculate people against evangelism in our churches. Phase 3, applying the top coats. What's that? Well, for a pastor, this is providing your people with the skills and tools to be able to actually do evangelism. It's teaching your people how to lead people to Christ and how to disciple them. Phase 3 is maintenance. That's regular touch-ups. What's that for pastors? For pastors, this is implementing specific strategies to maintain long-term evangelistic momentum. The last thing we want is a temporary blip on the church calendar or a fad. We want a DNA change, a change in the culture of a church which is going to last forever. The final result, what a magnificent house. The final result for a church, a thriving, genuine growth, biblical, Great Commission focused, Book of Acts, Holy Spirit infused, full of new life, where everyone is personally winning people to Christ church. Wow, what a church to belong to. You can create that kind of a church. What strategies must you as a pastor to implement in order to prepare your people for evangelism? Well, good questions. First strategy. We recommend you attend or host a Change the DNA of Your Church conference. To find out how to host a conference and what's involved, please visit our online library. There's the web address. Click on Resources, click on Seminar Attendees, use the password Mark1615. look for the section Strategy 1, Attend or Host a Church DNA Change Conference. Strategy 2, read Julian Batchelor's book on evangelism. By reading this book, you'll become aware of root causes, mindsets and other influences which are causing the people in your church to not do evangelism. To access free chapters of this book, please visit our online library, start downloading the book chapters, and please read them in order. Alright, what comes next? As a result of executing strategies 1 and 2, that's attending a conference, reading the book, you'll discover what we call the 12 lost truths. Well, what are they? At various points over the last 2,000 years, these critical 12 biblical truths have been lost. The loss of these truths has caused the people in your church to shut down in evangelism. The recovery of these truths will set your people free to evangelize. So this ministry is about truth recovery, largely. After you, as the leader of your church, have become familiar with the 12 lost truths, what then? Well, strategy 3, preach 10 mindset change messages in your church. Now, we provide the PowerPoint slides for this. These messages will eliminate the mindsets which cause people to not engage in evangelism. The messages will cover topics such as, what is a Christian? Why do we live by what's written in the Bible? How do we know it's God's Word? How was it translated? How were the words of Jesus recorded? What's the time difference between the recording and when they were first written? Who wrote them? How do we know they haven't been changed over 2,000 years like Chinese whispers and so on? How do we know we can truly trust the Word of God? We need answers to all this stuff. What happened at the fall in Genesis 3 that completely messed up the Christian church? What happened at the cross which completely reversed the curses in Genesis 3? The possibility of the reversal. Are all people outside of Christ really lost or not? Heaven and hell, what are they really like, and who is going there? Are Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, intellectually handicapped people, babies? What about babies? Where are all these people going, or people who can't make a decision for Christ? We need to know. What does it mean to make Jesus Lord? Who is the Holy Spirit? Why was he given, and why do we need him? The Christian worldview, what is it? And how should it change the way we do church? These are questions that people in churches are asking, and we need to clean them up so that they really have the power and the reasoning and the theology to actually become excited from their heart about doing evangelism. Well, why preach these 10 messages? Well, Reformation precedes mobilization. Without Reformation, there will be no mobilization. Strategy 4, preach 8 truth recovery messages. Then teach the 12 lost truths to your whole church as a series of 8 messages on Sunday mornings. This is another strategy which will prepare the people in your church for evangelism and help eliminate root causes. To provide the PowerPoint slides for each message, we provide them, and the notes for each person in your church. So you don't have to do all the work. We want to empower you as pastors and leaders. As the 8-part sermon series in your church is progressing, and for the next 12 months after the series is finished, you'll be implementing other strategies, which include giving your people skills and tools on how to actually do evangelism well, how to lead people to Christ, and how to disciple them. In total, there are 28 strategies. To get more information on these 28 strategies, including what they cost to implement, please visit the online library and look for the section called Step 2, Start Making an Evangelism Team Leader's Guide. Okay, if you're the pastor of your church, you won't be implementing all these strategies on your own. You'll choose someone in your church to become what we call an evangelism team leader, or ETL for short. They work alongside you and help you implement the 28 strategies. Coaching. We coach your ETL one-to-one, in person or by email, phone or Skype. Having your ETL coached is another one of the 28 strategies. Here's an evangelism team leaders guide. Well, your ETL and your coach will be working with a document called an evangelism team leaders guide, or ETL guide. This document unpacks the 28 strategies. Step by step, it explains how to reach the goal, which is 100% mobilization. Download this from our online library. Most churches have an existing year plan. As the pastor, and before you start your sermon series, we urge you to sit down with your ETL and other leaders to see how many of the 28 strategies you can integrate into your existing plan. It's critical that you and your leadership have unanimous buy-in before you start on this journey, so that if you encounter rough water, as was the experience of Christians in the early church, you'll be able to stand your ground strong and united as a leadership team. That's so important. Why have this meeting as leaders? Well, Luke 14:28 says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" Implementing these 28 strategies will turn your church from being a love boat to a rescue craft. Now, the principal feature of a love boat is that it exists for the people on the boat and their comfort and their entertainment and their luxury. What's the chief feature of a rescue craft? It exists for people outside the boat. Interesting. These 28 strategies are not a new fad or something we heard on Joyce Meyer or Charles Stanley. They are simply strategies which are guiding churches back to the original mandate of Jesus, which is 100% mobilization. These 28 strategies are like divine tugboats, to use another metaphor, simile, leading your church back out into the open water of the world with the gospel to seek and save the lost. Isn't that a great picture? The ship is your church, and those tugboats are the strategies. Great analogy. How will this change the existing ministries of your church? Many pastors have asked this question. Good question. To answer this, think of the various ministries in your church as being like the various parts of the human body. Well, here's the human body. So we could say the head was the home groups, the neck is the Bible study, and so on. That's CAP, Christians Against Poverty, social action, worship, youth, children, families, Alpha, Christmas box, seniors, the office team, overseas missions, school makeover, prayer, and so on. If every part of the body was a ministry of the church, then that's what the church looks like. So why is evangelism not mentioned so far? I'm going to tell you, it's the blood. It will run through every existing and future ministry in your church. It runs through everything and feeds everything. It gives everything focus. It's the ultimate reason every ministry exists. So you won't have to shut down ministries and close ministries and everything when you get involved with this initiative. What it's actually going to do is it's going to bring life and focus and power and food and nutrients to these ministries. It's great. These strategies provide a pastor with a clear pathway for leading his or her church back into success with the Great Commission. It's no longer a theory. It doesn't have to be something you've got to dream up yourself and think about how do you do this. We've done it for you. And ultimately genuine church growth. Finally, ever wondered why New Zealand is winning the gold medal on just about every negative social indicator? Gay marriage, teenage suicide, rampant alcohol abuse, overcrowded prisons, and so on. Well, John Stott comes up with an answer. And here it is. We have seen that society needs salt, that's preservation, and light, that's reformation, but only the gospel can create them. Gospel proclamation creates an antiseptic effect in which blasphemy, selfishness, greed, dishonesty, immorality, cruelty, and injustice find it harder to flourish. A country which has been permeated by the gospel is not the soil in which these poisonous weeds can take root, let alone luxuriate. Wow. God bless you, John Stott. So if we want to see a better New Zealand, America, England, Australia, or Canada, or wherever, the key to this If we're interested in bringing the kingdom, thy kingdom come, the key to it is getting back to what Jesus said. It's getting back to the Great Commission. It's mobilizing people in every church, every person in every church. God bless you, John Stott. What a great ministry you had, my friend. So, there are 3 keys to success. The more of these 28 strategies you implement, the sooner you'll reach the goal. Some pastors have sort of taken the 28 strategies and done a smorgasbord on them, and it hasn't worked for them. And that's the reason why. If you want to do this, we urge you to do it properly, do it thoroughly. 2, unanimous leadership buy-in is essential before you start. That's absolutely crucial. 3, implementing these 28 strategies is going to change your church significantly, but it's a great change. It's a change for the better. So embrace the change passionately, confident you are moving back into the very epicenter of Jesus' will, purpose, and mission. All right, God bless you. Thank you for watching this. Here's all our contact details. There's an email, there's a landline, there's a mobile number, and here's some web addresses that are connected with this ministry. God bless you. We look forward to connecting with you. Contact us, and let's get going. Let's start mobilizing everybody in your church to be active in evangelism. God bless you.